Hey folks, what's going on? This is Shadow Stars coming at you with another video. Today's video, I'm going to be breaking it into probably two videos just due to the length of the material that needs to be covered. Part one, this one, I'm going to be covering the current status. So I'm going to be I've updated all my numbers for all the tracking that I do. And I'm going to show you my logic, my reasoning, the data behind it, walking you through all that, and showing you what we could potentially see from AMC's Q4 results, their Q4 performance. And then I'm just going to discuss some of the impacts of what's happening right now, movie wise. Part two is where it has to be its own separate video in which I go over the big news bomb that hit and the potential effects of it and some of my thoughts of what needs to be done or what you should do or what you could do rather, depending on what your position is on this company. So without further ado, let's get to it. So what I want to show you folks right here, this is one of my sources of data, Box Office Mojo by IMDb Pro. So this will give you the daily box office breakdown. So I mean, you can drill it down daily, weekend, weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly, etc., etc. But the thing is that what I'm doing is I'm grabbing the total gross. On the daily, they break it by top 10 gross. On the monthly, it'll just grab the cumulative gross. You can obviously drill down to the specific movie that you want to look at, and it'll tell you on whatever specific day how much it grossed. This is all domestic box office. And then from there, you can make your comparisons of, hey, how is this movie performing compared to a movie that was released in whatever year, whatever quarter, etc. You can compare to see, hey, how did it do opening day, opening weekend, first week, etc., second week, and so forth. The reason why I find this important is because it gives these are numbers that are updated on a daily basis. It really gives you a sneak peek into how are the movie theaters doing? What's the box office doing? How's the industry? It can help kind of give you information about consumer trends. How many people are going to see this? How much money is being spent? Obviously, you don't get the exact figures in regards to literally how many people go, but you see, hey, how much did that movie gross? So that's the data, one of the main data sources I'm pulling the information from. So let's put it all into an Excel sheet, which I've been doing. So if you're new to this channel, this is an Excel sheet I've compiled. For example, on the left-hand side, right here, domestic box office. What I've done is I've grabbed the monthly figures for the past several years. So obviously 2022 this year, 2021 previous year. And then I skipped 2020 because we already know pandemic has heavily skewed it. And we know heavily skew of 2021 too, the first half. But nonetheless, I still grabbed the previous 3 years, pre-pandemic, 2019, 18, 17. And then just for reference, since Avatar is always brought up as a big hit, I brought in 2009 when Avatar was released. And then for comparison aspects, I do a separate little table here on the right side, 2021, 2022, easier to see. Year-to-year comparison, you got the monthly breakdown, the quarterly breakdown, and this is part of where I do some of my projections and calculations. So right here, currently December, as of December 21st, final data, 344 million for domestic box office. You look into what does that mean for the quarter so far. with only 10 days remaining, Q4 has done $1.4 billion. Now, I want to put that into perspective versus Q2. Q2 did $2.3 billion. So how far behind is Q4 to Q2? Just comparing this year. $884 million. $884 million would need to be done in 10 days for it to match Q2's performance. That's a pretty steep mountain to climb. And furthermore, I gave a potentially best case scenario. The best case scenario is, let's grab December 16th, that first full day where Avatar was shown. What was the domestic gross on that day? It was $57 million. If the remaining days left in the year, for those 10 days, if they have the exact same performance of Friday, that opening day of Avatar, how much would it gross? With 10 days, obviously it's much easier now. It's just move over zero. $576 million would be done. But the difference from Q2 to Q4 is 884. So even if it does this $57 million every day for the next 10 days, it still falls short by $308 million. So if it falls short of $308 million, subtract from Q2's figures then 2.325 minus 308 million. Let's make it simple and let's just say that comes out to $2 billion box office, domestic box office. It's a little bit better than Q3, but it's more than 10% less than what happened in Q2. Q4 was touted as being, hey, we got strong movies coming out. We got Avatar and Black Panther. That's going to save the theaters. That's the narrative that was pushed by a lot of people. But when we look at the data, that's not true. Sure, Black Panther, Avatar, they brought in money, but it wasn't enough money to match Q2's performance. Now, the reason why I said this 10 days is very optimistic of using this $57 million figure is if I go back to the daily figures. So let's take a look. From Friday onwards, right? That first day, 57 million. That's a Friday. Friday, Saturday, Sundays are usually your top three top grossing days. What happened on Monday? What happened on Tuesday? What happened on Wednesday? That all went down. But okay, so let's bring up a different movie then. Let's say Black Panther. Black Panther came out swinging. First day, 93 on a Friday. Saturday, 66. Sunday, 47. What did it do the following Monday? 12.7. Or sorry, this is not just Black Panther's performance, but the top 10 grossing on those days. Top 10. The individual performance is right here. So let me clarify. 93 million, 66, 47. But the following day, on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, a significant drop off. But come the second weekend, 29, 41, 28. So fine, is there ever a day where, for example, that first opening day is ever repeated on the weekend? Or even during the weekday? Is it ever repeated? Is this figure ever repeated on the second weekend? No. But okay, I know some people are going to make the criticism then. What about a different case? Black Panther, the type of movie and its performance is more heavily front loaded. Okay. Then this is the example for you. People say Star Wars. Oops, not this Star Wars. Let me find Star Wars. What was it? It was Star Wars 8, I believe, that did amazing. Right? Yep. The original release, domestic market. So, how did Star Wars do? Star Wars was still pretty heavily front loaded. 104 million first day. Come the next following days, 21, 20, 16, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, still significantly down, more than 50% down from the first weekend. But okay, then let's look up a different scenario then. Avatar. What did the first movie do then? Original release, domestic market. So 26 the first day, 25 the second day, 24 the third day. Now come the second week, 23, 28, 24. So okay, in this case, the first weekend and the second weekend actually looked to do basically better than the first weekend. So how does that hold up over the next? Second weekend, not as strong. You only get that big drop off on that Sunday. But the thing is this. Avatar has how many weekends left? We only have 10 days left. So we have one weekend and not quite two weekends. So even if this scenario that I presented of 57 million, if that single day is repeated for 10 days, which we know is highly unlikely, even in that best case scenario, it would still fall more than 10% short. Now, this is just domestic box office. So how does that impact AMC? So let me bring you to my calculations. Now, these figures here is just some of the data I've extracted from the AMC's SEC filings. So if you don't trust me, you can go to the SEC's website. So let me go back. This is SEC report, AMC's 10Q, right here, AMC Holdings, their most recent 10Q. And for example, I've pulled information like revenue, admissions, food and beverage, total revenues, operating costs, 545, 333, 545, 333. These are all numbers that I pulled straight from those documents. So what I have here is Q1 through Q3. And what I have here is my Q4 estimations. And at the top here, I've also brought in information of the domestic box office figures. Q1, Q2, Q3, and estimation of Q4. Now, mind you, when I did my initial projections, this was more than a month ago. Probably based on, I'll do one final update based on this weekend's performance. So come Monday evening, when the final data for the weekend comes in, I'll do one final revenue update or box office gross update, because I'll do a correlation study. I'll look at if the box office pulled in that much for that quarter, how much revenue did AMC do? Sure, it's not a perfect match, but it's a ballpark figure. Now, some people will say, hey, well, AMC isn't just domestic, it's not just US, it has theaters across the world. Sure. But look at the revenue split of AMC theaters. What percent of their revenue comes from overseas? What percent comes domestically? Last time I checked, little bit under a quarter of AMC's revenue is from overseas. So a vast majority, almost 80%, last time I recall, nearly 80%, it was like 78%, 78 point something percent, is from domestic. So even if you have a stellar international release, if if the theaters that you own are relatively limited, it's not going to impact your earnings as much. So in this case of Avatar, where people are pushing the narrative that, oh, Avatar is doing amazing, it's it's gonna gross 2 billion. Okay, and a lot of that 2 billion is going to be overseas. A lot of that in regions where AMC does not have theaters or has limited theaters. So that has limited revenue impact. So, nonetheless, right here, we have Q2's figures 2.32 billion. Q3 1.92 billion. And my initial projection in the medium range, because I have a high and low figure, 2.1 billion. And we already know that from this, it doesn't seem like it'll do 2.1 billion. It'll do closer to 2 billion. But nonetheless, let's run with this. And let's say it does hit 2.1 billion. And interestingly enough, find the middle point. Find the average between Q2 domestic box office gross and Q3. Comes out to 2.12 billion. Really close to what my initial projections was. So based on that, revenue could be in the ballpark of between what Q2 did and what Q3 did. 1.16 billion in revenue for Q2, 968 million for Q3. So this is what my figure here. I have a small calculation factor based on a couple other things, but $1.07 billion. So it's less than Q2. And you have some relatively fixed costs. You can go through previous, what I've done is I've pulled yearly data, and you can look at, hey, what percentage, let's say, of the revenue, what percentage of the admissions revenue is it? Is admissions revenue a part of their total revenue? And what part of that revenue, what portion of that percentage comes out to their film exhibition costs, their food beverage costs, etc. And you'll have certain expenses, operating expenses, that aren't really going to go down. Actually, they'll probably go up due to more and more places that they're acquiring. More places that they're acquiring versus because they're adding more places rather than dropping less profitable places. And we can see that slowly operating expenses have been going up. I would expect that as inflation continues to creep up, that's definitely going to affect their operating expenses. That could potentially have effects on their profit margins. So concessions, their food and beverage, their margins might slightly shrink unless they also decide to up the prices of their concessions and maybe also ticket prices. Rent could also potentially go up. And then depreciation, which for the most part does have some changes, but you're not going to see massive 20-30% swings in it. and I've looked at it through the yearly levels and through those quarters within those 4 or 5 years I used as a case study. So you'll have a rough approximation of what their operating costs would be, and we know roughly the amount of interest payments that they're making. So what I have here is their potential net loss, 129, so almost 130 million cash burn. Then combine that with what they had cash on hand and cash equivalents from previous quarter, 684. That would bring you down to $554 million. That's just based strictly on movie, just their performance as a movie theater. This has nothing to do with any sort of stock selling. That hasn't been factored in. So let's take a look then. So what did AMC do? Press release on December 19th. They raised 162 million through the sales of Ape. So it tells you they raised 162.4 million gross cash proceeds before fees and commissions through the sale of 125.9 million Ape. And it says during the fourth quarter, they raised 153.2 million of gross cash proceeds through the sale of 123.2 million Ape. So 152 minus a couple $1 million due to the fees and commissions. So they'll have added that to their cash on hand, basically. So let's say from this figure, what did we say? 153.2. But actually, you know what? Let's make that a flat 150 million. 3 million for fees. That brings it to 704 million. But guess what? They said they used a portion of the net proceeds from its at the market program to repurchase 30.7 million of their second lien debt due 2026 and 5.25 of its senior subordinated notes in 2027. So that's what? Subtract 30.7 and 5.25. $668 million. And also, during the fourth quarter, as a result of the debt repurchases and the previously announced Odeon debt refinancing, they reduced their principal payments of a debt by approximately $107, bringing the total principal debt reduction during 2022 to approximately $180 million. So it was able to knock off that total amount. So they give an update. What is their liquidity position? Now they also tie in their undrawn credit, revolving credit facility capacity, and they say it's in the range of 725 and 825. If you subtract that undrawn capacity of 211, what do you get? Let me pull up a calculator real quick. On the high end, 825 minus 211.2. Oops. 825 minus 211.2. 613.8 million on the high end. And what on the low end? 725 minus 211.2. 513. So between 513 and 613. So let's just do an average. 613.8 divided by 2. 563.8. So let's put that 563.8. Now, why is this figure different? Well, now you got to figure in. They had other debt payments. For example, they had that final debt payment, that Odeon loan. So that's probably going to account for about 100 million. So nonetheless, we're thinking, and obviously there's going to be some slight differences because these are just estimations of what their costs are. But cash on hand, about 563 million. Now, one other factor that you need to consider. AMC, under its debt covenants, has a minimum cash liquidity requirement of $100 million. It used to be higher. It used to be, I believe, $130 million. But due to them being able to clear out in one of their loans, they're able to knock that down from 130 down to 100. But nonetheless, from 563, subtract 100 million. So they have $463 million of cash on hand. So the concern is this. From a financial standpoint, the company is burning what? What's the average? If they did that net loss, roughly almost $150 million a quarter. If you have a really bad quarter, up to 300 plus million. But you have a less than bad quarter, Q2 and Q4, 120-ish, 130-ish million cash burn. So on average, 150. You have 460 million. So let's just say equals 460. If you burn on average 150 million a quarter, how many quarters left do you have before you're done? 3 quarters. Q1, Q2, Q3. Q1, Q3 are going to be bad. They tend to be slower. Q2 tends to be a little bit better. This is just the cyclical action of movie theaters. So based on current projections, just strictly based on the performance of movies, AMC would run out of cash by basically start of Q4 2023, next year. So they only have about 9 months left. But that's if movie theaters don't really improve. If this same performance is mimicked next year. But we could see improvement in the movie theaters. But how much? Could you see a 20% improvement? A 50% improvement? Even with a 20% improvement, instead of a $150 million cash burn, you get let's say a 20% improvement. So instead of 150 million, you're only burning 120 million. What's that bring you to? That only lasts you basically to the end of 2023. You would need to have a amazing more than 20% improvement from 2022's performance across the board for it to survive. That's just the cold hard truth based on the numbers. The box office I'll pull up the figures for you. On a yearly basis. Pre-pandemic, it's doing 11 billion. Right now, it's at 7 billion. And remember, we only have 10 days left. So in 10 days, if it does 50 million a day for 10 days, 500 million, 7.5 million, or let's be generous, round it up to 7.6. So bring out a calculator here. 7.6 million billion. What's that of, let's say, 2019's figures? 66%. It's only 2/3 the performance of 2019. So it's still greatly down. And I'm sure this number will be mentioned, the number of releases. Yes, we already know that, hey, pandemic really screwed over the production. So it's going to take time. Yes. So I've mentioned this in other videos too. If production was slowed down and it only started to ramp up once all the restrictions started to get lifted, basically end of Q3 2021, the typical average industry average of length, the time to produce a movie, anywhere from 2 to 3 years. That's the average. If it's quick, 2 years. End of Q3, so let's say Q4 2021 is when things got back to normal. Add 2 years to that. Where does that take you? Q3, Q4 2023. So next year, that's when things just start to come out. But what did the numbers show? It's going to be running out of money by 2023, that Q4 basically. So what does that mean? If we just consider these factors, stuff I mentioned, it needs to raise more money. More dilution needs to happen unless they're able to bring in other revenue streams that have a good profit margin that can help support this. It's hard to model what some of the new AMC initiatives will do. It's hard to model whether the new credit card, what that will do. Popcorn sales, whether that's in grocery stores, whether that's through partnerships with, I don't know, maybe delivery companies like Uber Eats or DoorDash, Grubhub, etc., Instacart, whatnot. It's hard to kind of model that without having kind of given that information from, I guess, the company, from AMC, or from someone who's kind of like who knows that industry well. So that's who knows really about the delivery business, or even Zoom. We don't know how much money that they could do. But nonetheless, is it going to have enough of an impact to offset their current cash burn? So that's just the fundamentals of just strictly based on movie performance. So based on the current figures that we have up until December 21st data, what it's projecting to look like, what Avatar has been doing initially, that's what it looks like is going to happen to AMC's Q4. It's not going to be better than Q2 from all signs of it, just from the numbers aspect. So it's going to most likely burn more cash. And the reason why the cash on hand isn't significantly lower is because it was able to do that massive, oops, sorry, that's in part two, this massive ape offering where they sold 123.2 million ape. Basically nearly a third of what was approved. Of that, was it 425 million authorized to sell? 123, 425, 123.2. So yeah, nearly a third of all the ape. The financials don't look good. So the question now becomes, will AMC be able to hold on until movies come back? And if movies do come back, will it be able to generate enough profit so that, hey, it can pay its debt? Because what people need to realize is its total corporate borrowings. It has over $5 billion of debt. Now, let's look at exactly when a lot of that debt is due. Sorry, I'm going to try to scroll down and find it here. 2026 is when they have the vast majority of their debt due. $3.3 billion. We know that going into 2023, they're probably not going to be profitable. They'll just barely have enough money to make it to near the end of 2023. 2024, they don't have much payments due. 2025, not as much. But 2026, they have these 2 years to turn a profit and make payments on this massive debt. Now, by all means, maybe they will be able to negotiate and refinance some of this. But will they be able to do it for all of it? Or even half of it? In 2 years, how are they going to generate $3 billion? Or let's knock that down. They're able to refinance and get this down to $2 billion. Will they be able to generate $2 billion worth of profits within 2 years? I have doubts, because you know why? 2019, pre-pandemic, box office was rocking. 11.3 billion. 2018, nearly 9 billion. Highest it's been. You can go back as far as 1977. 2019, 2018, and 2016 looks like the top 3 highest in recent years. But even if we just use 2019 and 2018, how did they perform? 2019, they ended the year with a net $149 million cash burn, net loss. 2018, 110 million profit. 2017, 487 million loss. So even with nearly the top 2 best grossing years, domestic box office, 2018, 2019, they were still net negative, nearly, $40 million. How are they going to generate even $2 billion to pay off this? You can even skip 2 billion and say 1 billion. How are they going to generate all that money, that profit? How are they going to be able to pay this debt? What creditors will believe that AMC will be able to pay this? If they refinance it, those terms are not going to be, most likely not going to be any better. The interest rates are not going to be much better. The whole macroeconomic conditions show that, hey, interest rates are rising. Inflation is not, a lot of people still don't think inflation is under control. So interest rates will continue to rise and stay at these elevated levels for the next at least 6 to 9 months. So tell me, what way is there to pay off this debt? Who is going to be able to pay? What will enable them? That's my food for thought. I look at the numbers. I look at previous performance. I look at data from previous years. I look at data from movies, previous movies. Look at comparisons. Try to look at similar movies in similar genres, similar styles, and I'll read back on news articles because I'll look at what industry professionals are doing. They'll make projections and they'll tell, hey, this movie is tracking to do this much. This movie is we're modeling it to track like what this movie did. And I'll pull that information and I'll make my projections. So I don't give you tinfoil hat theories. I don't give you random numbers made up from thin air. I have sources. I use factual numbers pulling from official SEC filings, financial documents, to make projections, along with industry given figures, domestic gross, box office gross. And the numbers are they tell a story. They show, hey, this is what could happen. Sure, things don't always go exactly way to your projections. Sure, it may come in lower, it could come in higher, it could come around. But nonetheless, without a crazy black swan event, you're not going to have something that's too terribly different. Anyone who's been trading on the stock market, look at earnings calls, earnings plays. In a normal economy, how often have companies missed projections by more than 50% when their revenue, their EPS, their earnings per share? How many times have they been so far off the mark? For companies without much information, that might be possible, but well-established companies, the blue chip stocks, how many times have projections missed the mark by more than 20-30%? Very few times. Almost never in recent years, as far as I know. So this was recap of what I think the current financial situation looks like for AMC, based on what the movie theater is doing domestically, combined with the news of on the 19th of the ape selling. Part 2, I'm going to be covering the next part of this big news bomb, of this potential deal that's going down. That is going to be a separate video. So hopefully you made it through the end of this video. I know it's very long, but these videos have to be long because I need to show you the evidence, the data, the sources, because to refute all the people that bring up random numbers, they don't show the proof. And to counter that information, I need to show you, hey, this is my source of where I'm getting the data. This is the logic and reasoning behind it. This is all the other different sources of data I pulled to support that. All these AMC grifters and shills and people who got no clue what the hell they're talking about, they don't do any of that because they just pull random numbers out of thin air. They make random correlations to stuff that shouldn't be compared to or even used together in any context. And then they push it out as a new theory and whatnot to blow it up and give themselves hopium. No, for me, I go by what the numbers tell me. Does that make mine completely true? No, because there's definitely things that my analysis could miss. But it's going to be far more accurate because it's relying on factual data. It's not based on random numbers that some people pick out of thin air. So I hope you guys found this useful. Part 2 will be recorded shortly. I'm going to try to make it shorter. And over the weekend, I plan to do a live stream to answer any questions that you may have if you're curious. So until the next video, folks, Shadow Star signing out. Peace.